Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another Mortal Kombat 1 video. I know it's been a while, but with the release of Peacemaker and Season 4, I thought it would be a great opportunity to come back, sit down, and really talk about the status of the game right now, as quite a bit has happened since I've taken a short break from the series. And needless to say that MK Twitter and YouTube has been a very interesting place to occupy. But with that said, what has been done to improve the game? And has Peacemaker really been the thing to save it 5 months in? Well, what's happened since I left? Well, Quan Chi and Chameleon released, which is awesome. These are all characters I'm very pleased to see in game. It's just a shame that it would have been great to try them out online if the netcode didn't implode on itself like crippling depression. Point is, this is all horribly overshadowed by the status of the netcode. So it's terribly tragic that the release of Quan Chi has put the game in such a state, especially if you wanted to play and lab against your friends on release. What doesn't really help is that in between that time, it was a very long season, which means that it took quite a while for a patch to come out. Thus, it's been a hard few months as an MK fan, especially with the release of Tekken 8. So a lot really hinged on the release of Peacemaker, as well as Janet Cage, who, mind you, is not yet available as of making this video. So with that in mind, the recent patch and the release of Peacemaker, has he actually saved the game? Well, yeah and no. The new arrival of a DLC character and season is always naturally just gonna have a large influx of players, as it does respark a lot of interest, as some simply play for the competitive aspect, whilst there are others that hunt for the cosmetics. So, with that said, what we have this season is, oh wow, at least the Melina skin looks great. That's nice. Now look, this season looks to be like a bit of a shamble for a number of different reasons, and it's pretty evident that the delay of seasons and characters has now inevitably caught up to that of the Kombat League seasons. Because even from a visual perspective, when you think of Melina, quite a number of different ideas come to mind. She's had a history of being a seductress. She's infamously known for wearing pink. And of course, the incredibly memorable Tarkatan fangs. Those are just things off the top of my head. So with that in mind, we don't get that at all in this season. Now, I know that some may go and say, well, it's Season of the Huntress. It doesn't have to necessarily match the mascot of the season. To which I say, wrong. No. When we look at the previous seasons, and how the skins represent each different character, what we have here for Melina's season simply does not represent what she's about. So why so is that the case? Well, currently, looking into things, it looks like the season has been merged with the Season of Chaos, being a weird hybrid with Melina's own season. So it kind of explains why she, as a mascot, is so out of place here with what the rest of the skins have to offer. This looks like it was supposed to run alongside Titan Havoc. And what kind of further solidify these skins' designs is that they all distinctly look like the Kenshi, who we did see alongside Havoc at the end of the story. So it's incredibly evident here that the catch-up between these seasons has led to this weird merge between the two that simply doesn't really work with each other. So with that said, what about the skins themselves? Well, they aren't the worst things I've ever seen, but they're pretty hideous. The problem is that fundamentally, these skins just don't correlate with what the season represents. And the skins themselves aren't very pleasant to look at. And I get it, it's in theme for Havoc and Chaos. But slapping a bunch of characters with a mohawk and having them look like they've just rolled around in cans of paint on LSD isn't what I would really dub as chaos. I don't think it does nearly enough for these skins. And I know, some might like it. Different strokes for different folks. But as seasons go so far, this is undoubtedly the weakest the skins have ever been, as it's a very clear clash of different ideas on display here. As for invasions, I haven't really sat down to touch this season yet, so I don't really have an opinion to give. But with the team touching it up, I do believe that the general quality of life changes to be quite beneficial in the long run. My only wish is that going forward, that the team could add some replay value to this. Like maybe being able to go back to play an older season, or even better yet, kind of like MK11's Crypt, restock it with content from older seasons, so it gives you a reason to grind through it again. I think if there's anything holding Invasions back, is that it lacks replay value, as once it's done, it's done. Give players the freedom to restock it with some of the older gear from previous seasons, or better yet, fill it with older Combat League rewards, so it gives reasons for people to come back. As for the season story itself, it's actually pretty cool. I haven't touched on the narrative aspect of Invasions, but I do like these small little cute short stories that kind of fill out and tell these narratives that exist outside the main canon. For Melina, I genuinely like that it plays off the older canon for her spliced flesh pit roots, as the rise of this Melina's army was all done by a very ambitious Shang Tsung, one that did lead to his inevitable downfall. That stuff's really neat. I quite like the opening, but with that said, I did find the wrap-up to be very anticlimactic, because tying back to that of previous seasons, we do actually see the defeat of the invasion boss. But here, she is notably absent, and it feels more like the fall of her army than actually defeating her personally. I don't know if this was purposely done, so there's like a window of opportunity for her to return later, but it is a little bit unsatisfying in the wrap-up. Otherwise, narratively, it's pretty good. And again, I am glad that Melina has had some exposure here. So in summary, I definitely do think this is currently the weakest season. Whilst yes, I like the theme for sure, it hasn't quite promised the direction it could have gone in. And I definitely feel like that lack of direction has really been felt. With that said, let's move on to the legacy skins. And these feel very divisive to me, because when I look at these art stills of these models, I definitely don't think they look fantastic. However, in motion, in-game, when they're moving and doing stuff, I think they look great. I don't know, it's really weird to me, because visually, they do look kind of flat, but that's somewhat the charm of the simplicity of these older designs. Like, there's not too much going on, but there's enough distinct features that they do stand out in their own way. And along with this, the obvious influence by John Tobias's older design are things I find to be very charming here. So I can't really hate on it all that much. Although I will say I'm not a fan of the Sub-Zero skin, because in like his default skin in-game, Bihan's pretty bulky, he looks quite cut. But in this costume, he's lacking a lot of the build we saw before. So NRS, please, bulk my boy up and feed him some protein powder. All in all, I think these skins are okay. As legacy skins go, they aren't the best the team has ever provided, but they do feel very new, but I definitely appreciate them exploring other avenues and different artistic influences. So now we get to move over to Peacemaker, and I don't know what it is, but NetherRealm are kind of killing it with their DLC characters. Omni-Man, fucking awesome. Love the way he plays, great voice acting, stellar homages to the show. And I know for a fact that Robert Kirkman did have a hand in writing his dialogue. So all around, great inclusion. Tremor, whilst incredibly awkward to micromanage, and does function with very niche teams, is still extremely unique to the roster with what he has to offer, playing like no one else with how he can switch variations. Quan Chivo is probably the biggest dud on release, but in the most recent patch, they have tinkered with him, and he is a lot better now. As for Chameleon, she's incredible. Great homages to the older games with the rotational characters she has on her cameos. So, how does Peacemaker land in comparison? Well, holy shit, is he a lot better than anyone expected. You see, NRS players suffer from what I call zoning PTSD, and it's largely been inflicted by characters like Deadshot and Robocop. So when they saw Peacemaker and a gun, they pretty much immediately shut down and said, this is the next zoner of the game. This is all he's gonna be about. And thus did overlook the rest of his utility. So now that he's out, and we can actually see him in motion, we see that Peacemaker is so much more than that. And if I'm entirely honest, I feel like they downplayed him pretty hard on the Kombat cast. Because in-game, he's amazing with a multitude of different combo routes and avenues. He feels like the antithesis of an MKX character, where every move and every special has an option and a launcher that feel like they can be applied in a multitude of different situations. He feels very practical no matter where he is on the screen. So I am thoroughly impressed, especially with how they've intertwined aspects from the show into his toolkit. So honestly, I'm just so glad he has exceeded people's expectations. Because of all the guest characters, this was easily the one I was the most worried about gameplay wise. Also, big additional brownie points, as John Cena does a great job with his character here. Because, as we know, guest voice actors tend to be kind of hit or miss. But John really puts in the effort, sounds really good, and the dialogue feels very, very faithful to his depiction in the show. I really cannot praise this character nearly enough. So with that said, that does largely wrap up my thoughts on Season 4 of Mortal Kombat 1. And it really is a very mixed and very divisive bag. As whilst Peacemaker is really well done, and does make me incredibly optimistic for the rest of the DLC. His inclusion can't really carry this season, as the season itself is having an identity crisis. It's parts Melina season, parts Havoc season, and the items included in said season just aren't quite as appealing as what we've seen before. And if we are to explore the possibilities that could have been there, we could have had some very cool Tarkart inflicted variations of characters. Like, it's a real shame that they didn't follow through on this, as it feels like such a missed opportunity. In saying that, we do have Season 5 on the horizon, which is scheduled to be the Dark Raiden saga. So I am quite optimistic with what they're gonna do with that. Anywho, with that said, what are your thoughts on this season? What do you like about it? What don't you? Please do comments down below. Also, what are your thoughts on Peacemaker right now? As I'd love to hear what you have to say. I don't normally do these season summaries, but this was quite a bit of fun to put together. So if you liked it, and maybe want to see more in the future, I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up, as it gives me an idea of what you'd like to see. But anyway, I've taken up enough of your time today, so as always, stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting.